So we shall begin right on the dot and at 2 p.m. as the agenda published suggested. Once again, I would like to apologize on behalf of the organizers for that little bit of a hiccup. And like Joanna said, we are going to record this meeting and we're going to publish that on social media so that the rogue internet users could perhaps have their field day with that after it's published, but without the interference to the meeting itself. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Wojciech Szczerba. I work as the case handling team coordinator for the ECC Poland, as in European Consumer Center Poland. We are part of the European Consumer Center network, but I don't need to explain any of that to most of the participants because we know most of each other, as far as I can tell, by the list of this reduced list of participants. And today we would like to have a little bit of a discussion on the e-commerce or the developments of e-commerce dangers that the consumers are facing, etc. In the era of global pandemic, which has obviously shifted the consumer markets very significantly. It has influenced many market sectors, but today the topic for today is the widely understood e-commerce. And allow me to, as a matter of introduction, allow me to quote a few figures. Back last year, as the pandemic started and we did a few presentations around the country regarding the changes to the market and e-commerce, etc. What was striking is the meteoric rise of the importance of e-commerce in the overall consumer market as we understand it. Just to quote a little bit of numbers for perspective, according to globally published data, the share in the share of e-commerce in the overall market has risen by 6 percentage point from about 13% to 18% and a bit, and it has continued its rise by another 1.5 percentage point for 2021. And as far as if one is to believe the statistics and predictions that are published, the importance of e-commerce is going to continue to rise, and if it's bound to reach and it is bound to reach about 21, 22, 23, even 23% according to some estimate by 2024. So it is definitely something that one working in the field of consumer protection, consumer advice, policy making, one has to bear in mind because of its growing importance and the shift of consumers towards such markets. Yes, we have got we are observing some interesting trends. We are observing some things that we saw a few years ago and we thought to have been eradicated. However, with the flurry of new internet users coming to the market and making purchases, sometimes for the first times in their lives, they are facing dangers that the let's say more experienced internet users are a little bit more familiar with and a little bit more risk averse to. Without the further, just a little bit of an explanation about the format. We are going to discuss in panel, we are going to discuss 3 main questions, and time allocated for each question is about 25 minutes maximum. There will be some room to ask questions if there's any time left, because I am pretty sure that all the panelists with all their experience could talk about the e-commerce and all the risk associated until tomorrow, and not just utilize the time allocated for this short but juicy event. Right. So without further ado, allow me to move on to the first question. The question to put forward to the panel is, who has benefited from the pandemic? The context of that is that it seems indisputable that the e-commerce industry, like major and smaller retailers, etc., thanks to the shift towards the e-commerce purchases that we have observed in the last year and a half, couple of years, the rise of the importance of the e-commerce. But is it also beneficial for consumers? Is it easier and more, what's probably more important, is it safer for them to shop online, or are you observing any dangers, and can you think of any actions that can be taken for this for those risks to be averted? Right, so let's just I shall now give floor to the panelists, and the question I believe I may well go with the order as I see you guys on the screen, and I shall give floor to Yolanda first. Yolanda, working for the Svensk Handel, and she's a vice chair of Business Europe Consumer Marketing Working Group.
Oh, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here with my old colleagues from before, from the ECC network. Yes, I am pleased to have the opportunity to tell what the business side sees. And well, at first, with this tragical event with the pandemic, I will say that nobody benefited from this kind of terrible times that we have. But of course, I totally agree. We can see the e-commerce has grown, and also the issue with the change is a more integrated part of the shopping habits. And this was due to the situations that we have, and also the difference is what we shop on internet. And of course, this new business model was created, and now we see a more integration. I think, well, both businesses and consumers have been affected of the lockdown and how we shop. But it also has provided new possibilities. We can see, we made investigations by the Svensk Handel that the change of consumer, we see the questions here about the elderly consumers. They have increased their shopping, especially maybe for food, but also other issues. So it's more possibilities also to have the delivery issues, a big assortment, what you can choose about. And if I just short say the safety issues, yes, both the business side and consumer side have had problems during the pandemic with fraud issues and so on. But we can see that authorities have acted, the Commission, Europol, and also the business side, where we have warning or help with the fraud desk and so on. And I stop there and leave the floor to another panelist.
Thank you very much, Yolanda. That's definitely a very interesting take, interesting perspective on that. And yes, one can definitely see that probably the biggest rise in the e-commerce can be seen amongst the, let's say, the new users, like the elderly consumers that didn't really have the habit of shopping online beforehand, but well, the situation kind of turned them to shopping online. And so now I would like to pass the microphone to Augustin Reina, who works for BEUC, which is one of the most important organization to the overall to the overall consumer landscape in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to engage in dialogue with the ECCs and all the other co-panelists. Indeed, the pandemic has changed dramatically our lives in all aspects. What we have, of course, identified is that e-commerce was growing already very fast before the pandemic. Studies have shown that consumers were really omni-channel, so using all different sort of channels online and offline to access products and services. Of course, once member states and governments have to adopt restrictions to free movement and impose many lockdowns across the continent, across the world, that also meant that consumers have to move online full time, not only regarding their shopping habits, but also working and socializing, so on and so forth. And of course, these have also shown or exacerbated problems that we have already identified pre-pandemic. From the consumer side, we could, of course, identify the widespread sale of unsafe products via marketplaces, for example. Our members, they have engaged in what we call mystery shoppings, where they have, for example, placed products that were unsafe to see how fast then the platform will react in order to remove them. Some of the cases these were fine, but it was also identified that the products were on the marketplace long after they had been signaled as problematic, or even if they were removed, they were kind of very easy to place back on the marketplace. We have also identified widespread use of unfair practices, particularly regarding COVID-19 related claims, products that were promised to cure COVID or to be very protective, which apart from being also misleading and leading the consumers to take I think someone needs to mute. It's fine. Okay, thank you. Of course, a part of being misleading and likely to influence the consumer behavior could also put a threat on the well-being and health of the people consuming these products. Also, online scams, unverified consumer reviews. So we have seen all these problems that we have already identified pre-pandemic became even more prominent these days. But this is for the consumer. From the consumer side, I can appreciate that there have been also many challenges also from the business side, as mentioned by Yolanda, particularly regarding deliveries, dealing with VAT issues. So there was a significant number of problems from the offer side. And now, of course, the big question is what will happen after the pandemic. Will consumers change their habits back to pre-pandemic scenarios? Probably, and many of them, of course, will adapt. But the reality is that this online world is here to stay. So we need to be able to address the many challenges from a consumer perspective, and then more broadly, we also need to think, which perhaps exceeds this roundtable discussion, but what also will mean for brick and mortar shops. This is very much at the center of the discussion, for example, around the review of the vertical product exception regulation and the guidance from a competition perspective. But certainly, we also need to think from a law perspective whether something else needs to be done in this context. But I leave it here and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Augustine. That is definitely a very interesting perspective on this as well, and we definitely need to monitor monitor the reports that we are getting from the consumers, both on the ground level, boots on the ground level, if you like, from the advice organizations, as well as the overall data that those various organizations may submit to higher authorities, to those policy-making authorities that will definitely they'll definitely play a role in the future to make the policies, the legislation more if that's even possible, to make it both more consumer and business friendly. This is a kind of balance that one should strive towards. Now, okay, so we've had one perspective from the business, one perspective from the consumer organization. Now let us give the floor to another representative of business side of things, and that'll be Mr. James Waterworth, who works for Amazon. James, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I hear we should start with happy birthday. I believe it might be your birthday, so
that is indeed correct. Thank you very much.
Looking very elegant on your birthday, and thanks for inviting us to this conversation. I mean, to sort of state the obvious, conversations like this are incredibly useful for a business to hear what people are thinking about as we constantly seek to improve our business. And this has been a very specific moment in time, this pandemic. So I'm just going to make two separate types of comments. Firstly, a few just on the overall commercial environment, what's changed during the pandemic, and then a few matters that we already touched on about how to ensure that people stay safe and are only getting high quality products. So first thing overall is obviously during the height of the pandemic, we saw a number of government restrictions in some countries. And so what happened in retail and what happened for an industry experience or what happened for consumers, a little bit depended on the format that you were operating. Some were, of course, closed by government instruction, which is very difficult for the retailers, and some were able to continue. And overall retail is thriving. And what we see, however, is that omni-channel retail is becoming more and more of a reality. It was already a reality up to 2019 and prior to the pandemic. What the data suggests is it's becoming even more the reality, not just during the pandemic, but in terms of consumer behavior and industry investment as we look forward to the next few years. A couple of data points. We saw new formats becoming much more popular. One good example during the pandemic, when people were trying to stay safe, was people ordering online, particularly groceries, and then going to a particular pickup point, whether pavement pickup point, car park pickup point, to pick up groceries. That grew by some 250% in some countries from a previously low level. And you could see at the peak of the pandemic that perhaps 20% of purchases in large continental scale areas, whether EU or US, were online. But already about a third of those involved some kind of physical dimension. So whether that's picking up products offline or, for example, returning products offline. So these formats become more and more intertwined, and it's going to become more difficult to tell them apart. Some well-established retailers, Amazon is well known as having started as an e-commerce player, but now moving into physical commerce. We have more than 500 physical shops in the world. And if you look at retailers that have grown in the other direction, if we take a major supermarket brand like Carrefour, its digital and multi-channel sales grew by some 100% between pre-pandemic and mid-pandemic. So you can see growth going in both directions. The second part of your question, which is how do we ensure people have an easy shopping experience and a safe shopping experience, is also extremely important in terms of how the company we manage our operations. And as has been mentioned, we saw, particularly during the pandemic, two types of problems which we hadn't really dealt with at the same scale before emerge, which was misleading claims, people making claims about products which were not legitimate and particularly serious if they related to the pandemic itself. And secondly, to price gouging, people trying to make an unreasonable profit from a very difficult situation from which ultimately nobody benefits, as Yolanda mentioned before. And as a company, we need to take measures to control both of those, because if a customer has an experience with relation to an unsafe or misleading product or an unreasonable price, they are not going to be coming back neither to shop with Amazon or any of the merchants using our service. And what we will ultimately do is put in place new controls. If a merchant repeatedly flouts the terms of service provided for using Amazon, then we will either suspend or even revoke their permission to sell using our service. Overall, we've got about 10,000 employees working on preventing fraud and abuse, whether developing systems or conducting manual reviews. And what we know is that overall about 99.999% of the products listed on our stores are safe. And when we review the 0.0001% of products which get flagged, then the majority don't have a genuine safety situation. But you can never take these things for granted, because fraudsters are constantly evolving. And problems can be bad batches from manufacturing, from a very well-established, high-quality supplier, through to people deliberately seeking to conduct fraud and extract money from customers. So we all constantly need to be on our toes. When I say we all, starting with Amazon, and hopefully all businesses like Amazon. And that means constantly revamping our checks, looking at background checks and verification checks for sellers, knowing our business customer, and making sure we've got the right tools to prevent, to pick up upon, and then prevent unsafe listings being made, and to fight fraud, whether that's investment in machine learning tools, in looking at product descriptions in order to remove things before they cause problems. Finally, the cooperation that we have, whether with consumer groups or market surveillance authorities, is absolutely indispensable. So ensuring that once there is information about a dangerous product, that it is shared not only with us as a company, but shared broadly with all participants, all in an area of industry, all retailers, for example, to make sure they all have precise information about problematic products. And so action can be taken not just by one company, but by all companies who might potentially be selling such a product. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. That is most certainly an interesting perspective, and it's definitely useful. Like you say, it's very important for the major retailers and other retailers who definitely follow suit to cooperate with the market surveillance authorities and other stakeholders in the consumer market, because that's the indispensable source of intelligence with regards to trends, new emerging scams, monitoring of unsafe products, etc. So yes, definitely the cooperation between business and the regulators is definitely something that is very desirable. And last but not least, I would like to give floor to our dear colleague Patrick Appelt, working for the German e-commerce directive contact point. Patrick.
Greetings, and I'm sorry, I have to, yes, it's on. Greetings, thank you very much for the invitation. And first of all, happy birthday, Wojciech, from my side as well. And yes, just for confirmation, I work here for the Center for European Consumer Protection, but in the center is also the e-commerce contact point, and we are a solely advisory service for all users of the internet. So we have we get the feedback from the consumers and the traders of both sides, and from these questions that reach us, we can give a little bit of input what we think that might have been a problem during the pandemic, and also give our input, and also get feedback from other interested parties here, so that we can explain it to the consumers and traders as well that reach us. So during the lockdown, of course, it was there was no possibility to shop otherwise other than on the internet, at least in a lots of countries. I was living in France. I'm still living in France, and there the lockdown was very, very hard. So we had no other possibility to buy more than just for the daily life in the local store. So the only possibility was, of course, the e-commerce. And so the answer is clear. The consumer benefited during the pandemic quite well from the e-commerce sector. Not only the traders, because he had no other, the consumers had no other possibility to shop. Also, they had a lot of time at home, so they had a lot of possibility to check the offers that were here and there. So also not only the big e-commerce sellers profited from this, but also new startups that started emerging in this time of the lockdown, that with new offers that were not seen in the pre-pandemic. And what will be interesting for us to see if they can still hold on in the world without lockdowns or contact restrictions, like the food delivery service or online formats for formation that were quite a big evolution in the sector that we followed in the last 2 years. So To the other question, is it safer or not? In my opinion, the overall growth makes more problems. So we had seen a lot more growth in the e-commerce market, and on the other side we had also a growth of problems. But the problems, I think, were more or less the same than in the pre-pandemic time, and because the overall growth in e-commerce was there, we also had more problems. But I think the rise of problems and the rise of e-commerce traffic is in a balance. Of course, there are a few problems that emerged, especially in the last 2 years, that we can see that follows the overall problems of the pandemic. For example, we had a disruption of the supply chain from China to here, and this is kind of the problems that the consumers have when they make redress on products and want to repair an exchange, and the trader says we cannot do this or cannot do that. But this is a direct problem, not a legal problem or a problem of bad will from the trader side, but a problem of the reality that we all live in. This was quite new, and also what we had a lot of complaints about that were related to the pandemic measures of the postal service that did not bring the order directly to the consumer, but left it somewhere else to avoid contact with the consumer. So these were pandemic specific problems that we think that will lessen in the future. But overall, I think the balance is that we had not that much more problems because of e-commerce related problems because of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Another very useful take on the issue. And if I can say a couple of words from myself, yes, like you say, it is probably about the scale that, well, the more consumers, let's say the new consumers not so accustomed to using using e-commerce previously, once they enter the market, they are unfortunately susceptible to the threats that let's just say more experienced internet users are more adverse to. Right, so I can see the meeting is flowing nicely. We are just a couple of minutes behind. I can see there are no questions from the chat. Perhaps we should mention that, well, if any one of you participants has any questions to the panel as a whole or any particular panelist, please feel free to enter the question in the chat feature of the application. So let us move on to the second question of this debate, and the question is, what were the biggest challenges for the industry, but also for the consumers, in particular the senior consumers? And yes, we need to focus on our senior consumers because they are bound to be less experienced in using the internet. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you think that can be done to make the experience of shopping online safer for such new consumers, how we could perhaps educate the consumers in keeping safe in the great depths of the internet. So once again, allow me to give the floor to Yolanda first.
So thank you. Well, I think when we were talking about consumers getting more time, being home, shopping, and so on, they were also very active. Just referring to the last question about the safety, we had a lot of consumers contacting us as Svensk Handel because we have the warning list, as also James mentioned, that companies, authorities can use, and that we tips each other. And that was used a lot. And also consumers were calling us for advice. And as you say, it's an educational issue. Most of our members are small and medium-sized companies. And I think it's an educational issue on both ways. And in Sweden, as you know, we didn't have any real lockdown, but we have some restrictions. But we had a problem, and that was also mentioned. For example, I know with a big furniture company, when there was a stop in the Suez channel, it was problems with the delivery, exactly as Patrick mentioned. In extremely price increasing when we were the container issue, as we mentioned, from China, and how to handle all the complaints and that side from the business side was doing a lot to us. And also the issues that consumers had the demands and you couldn't satisfy them because this was an extraordinary circumstances and you couldn't do the right thing as you wanted. But also we saw what was the problem from the business side was the different rules across the Europe when it was the cross-border issues, because we had, as you mentioned, different challenges and how the emergency measures was done. And I can mention, for example, for the business side in Spain during the pandemic, they suspended the right of withdrawal, which was really damaging for companies doing trade with Spain during that issue. And I think also the issue when we are talking about digitalization and the international trade, that we can see the competition coming from third countries outside. And that also depends when you are talking about the product issue and how important it is that the products on the European market or everywhere are safe and not harming. And also the issue with counterfeit goods. And we mentioned also the issue, we had a lot of small companies or medium size selling medical devices who was also being hurt by fraud issue. They thought they bought the right goods, having the right documentation who wasn't genuine. So that is some of the issues I would like to raise. Yes, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Yolanda. Yes, I believe the overall message we should be putting out there is that if something looks too good to be true, it usually is. Yes, it is a cliche. However, if you sort of follow that general, rule, you are generally safer. Whether you're shopping online or whether you're shopping in a store that you walk into. Right, okay, yes, and regarding your remark about the supply chain, yes, I have also noticed this issue with this major furniture retailer that you have mentioned.
A mí me parece que no está mal.
Right, okay, so so I would like now, like with the previous question, I would like to hear Agustin's take on this subject.
Es verdad que
Thank you very much. I think, of course, there is not a single solution. There is a combination of measures that are needed. Education plays a very important role from a very early age, I would say. It's not a panacea, however, because we cannot put, as we know, all the burden on the shoulders of the consumer. Even what happened to us, a conference organized by consumer experts got hijacked. So sometimes you just simply cannot foresee all the potential dangers that are out there. But nevertheless, I do agree, education is important also as a tool to make the new generations self-aware, but also to be more inclusive. Regarding, as you mentioned, for example, elderly people or more vulnerable communities. But I say education is important, not a panacea. What we also need to think of is enforcement, better and more consistent enforcement. I think when it comes to consumer law, many authorities at national level have not been serious enough when it comes to the enforcement. And this is, of course, it's not good for consumers, first of all, but it's not good also for companies that operate across 27 different markets. And therefore here, we need to look closer about how to streamline this enforcement. We will have an opportunity to discuss this in the review, for example, of the Consumer Protection Cooperation Network regulation there. And certainly there is a scope for more European enforcement, or more coordinated enforcement at the European level. We also need to look at how, for example, the UCPD needs to be adapted. Is the current rules enough to address all these challenges? For example, if we think of the widespread use of dark patterns or misleading design interface. Is the UCPD up to date to address these challenges? And don't forget, the UCPD is still not a very old consumer directive compared to others, but was a directive was adopted before the e-commerce boom, and certainly before the widespread use of this type of practices. So there, I think as well, we need to look at what can be done in the context of consumer law, and certainly, companies, they play an extremely important role. Market leaders as well, and there certainly more needs to be done to ensure that people shopping across platform and across channels, can on one side feel protected, but also fundamentally that they are protected. There are no surprises, afterwards. So certainly it's a combination of measures that need to be put in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agustin. Yes, indeed. Well, it is all about getting the combination of education and enforcement right. Well, my personal take on this is that I have always been pro introducing a little bit of consumer education, even adding them to school curriculum, that just the basics, because I have always thought that one of the very good channels to educate even those elderly consumers could be school children telling telling their parents and grandparents what they have learned at school in a very excited manner. So right, okay, so now again I would like to give floor to James, and I would like to ask James what the big retailers' perspective on this is. What is the challenge for the for a big retailer like Amazon, and what is Amazon's take on the increased use of their services by senior consumers? James.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of different challenges, some of which are to do with customers and some of which are to do with the pandemic, to do with employees during the pandemic. And let me start with that one. I think given, if we all remember, the speed with which the seriousness of the pandemic became apparent and the seriousness of restrictions and changes in health practice became clearer in March, April 2020. So our primary concern was, how are we going to keep our operations going? How are we going to keep employees safe? And how are we going to keep customers and other delivery partners, postmen and women, for example, safe during the pandemic? And we'd never done this before. No one had ever done this before, so it needed to be worked out quickly and well. And what we did was to change hundreds of different processes. For example, in our warehouse would be one very good example, whether relating to beginning and end of shift times, whether it's staggering of delivery drivers, whether it's to do with lunch patterns, so people are not all congregating in the same room at the same time, whether it's to do with entrance and exits, to make sure that people were safe at work, as well as providing, for example, personal protective equipment. And we all remember that at the beginning of the pandemic, there wasn't really much in the way of personal protective equipment, particularly face masks, available. And it took several weeks before they were available for frontline doctors and nurses, let alone for people in shops or retail warehouses, all of whom were in the front line, of course, as were postmen and women. And so keeping them safe and motivated, because let's not forget, all of these people were in the front line while many other people were sheltering at home, whether elderly consumers or others. All of these people were in the front line of keeping us all supplied, whether in the background or actually coming to our front doors or receiving people in shops. So PPE, enhanced cleaning, social distancing, looking at wages and bonuses. And in our case, one of the things that we also did was to develop our own in-house COVID testing capability that wasn't part of what was already going on, because that was already in high demand, but we developed additional capacity for COVID testing so that we could conduct frequent tests on employees in order to keep the work environment as safe as possible. We spent last year about $11.5 billion on that. So it was a very expensive operation, but worth every penny, both to be able to keep operations going and to keep people safe. I think with regard to elderly consumers and indeed consumers in general, I would say two things. First of all, we don't treat elderly consumers any different to other consumers. During the pandemic specifically, I think we're very proud about the fact that we could deliver necessary products, which is what we had to do for a while, restrict our choice of products available to necessary categories, to elderly people, but indeed to everybody, thus keeping them safe, because clearly the consequences of being exposed to the virus for elderly people at the beginning pre-vaccination were even more serious than for people of other ages. So it's keeping people supplied and safe. I think the second part of this is, it really goes back to what I and others said earlier about the cooperation mechanisms, whether with market surveillance authorities, police, consumer groups, which is how do we rapidly look out for new types of scams or problems where people try to sell unsafe products. And that can be accelerated through our cooperation. And I think for consumers, shopping from trusted brands, whether that's the trusted retail brand, the trusted product brand, both of those is imperative. We know that every year before Christmas, Europol produces guidance for people about online shopping, and top of their list is shopping from trusted brands. So I think this situation has reinforced the importance of shopping from a service you trust. That for us means being that service from which consumers can trust that they will be reimbursed if there's any problems. We have an A-to-Z guarantee where people can come to Amazon if they're not getting any response from a third-party seller who's using our service, for example. So making sure you're dealing with a trusted brand is absolutely imperative, and probably even more important in the last 18 months than it always has been.
Thank you very much, James. And yes, from my perspective, I can say a little bit of an anecdote that, well, yes, it was indeed very much a difficult business to keep the deliveries going. A friend of mine works as a postman in the United Kingdom, and he has been saying that, well, usually back in the day it was like a little bit of a peak pre-Christmas, so like a month before Christmas they would have plenty of work, whereas during the pandemic he said it's like pre-Christmas round the clock indeed. And yes, it is very important for the consumers to perhaps start their search with trusted, reputable brands, and for those businesses to stay reputable. Myself, working on the first line of consumer advice, basically, one can very often hear the comment, no more shopping from X because they have tricked me. And we would also try to alleviate this a little bit, basically just sometimes telling the consumers that it is all about the scale and perspective, and that mistakes happen. Right, okay, so again, last but not least, let us hear Patrick's perspective on the issue. Patrick.
Yes, my perspective is not that different than what we have already heard. Of course, the challenges were on both sides, mostly on the trader side, I guess, to keep the business going and to keep the people who work in the offline part of e-commerce safe, and also to guarantee that all the products are shipped in time and with as little disruption as possible. And of course, now we have, during the pandemic or during the off phases of the pandemic, we also saw that it was important for businesses, especially in the travel sector, to regain the confidence of the consumer. In the beginning, we had the problem that all in the travel sector, everything was canceled, and we had the problem how to get back the money. But then we were in a little phase where travel seemed really possible, but everyone was holding back and did not really think, is it a good idea? And so it was important for the industry to regain the confidence. And we saw things that we haven't thought possible, that, for example, flights or accommodation services that were free to cancel, and that was the norm. Otherwise, it was always, okay, you can pay an extra and then you get free cancellation rights. In this time, we saw that the big airlines, they only sold free cancellation tickets all the time. And this is something, again, it was important to regain the confidence and to get the people moving and to hold out hope that they could actually go to the country of their choice on holidays. So, and also new insurance products that we saw in the sector, where it was possible now to cancel if one of the family members were contacted the virus or got ill in other parts. So this is, I guess, it was a challenge to regain the confidence, and there are different measures that at least in this sector the companies tried. Another challenge, I guess, was to keep, it was a challenge for us as consumer protectors, to keep up with the national rules in every country in cross-border shopping, when during the pandemic a lot of national legislators decided to protect their own economy and change the rules on how to cancel and to cancel contracts and how to get the whole thing going on. The predominant was the voucher solutions that many countries adopted for their industry or for their cultural scene, that was not protected by EU law, so they could work around the usually national laws. And of course, we do not have to forget that from January on, we had the Brexit. So this was also for the companies a issue that I think they could have gone without with the whole pandemic. And of course, on the consumer side, the big challenges were with the disrupted supply chains, that they could not order things that they really wanted, especially in the technological products that were restricted, or parts that could not be delivered and so not sold. And this, of course, scam sites used. So they offered products that were not on the market to reasonable or higher prices. And this was also a pre-Christmas scam. Shopping websites were on the face. And of course, in the beginning of the pandemic, when we had no face masks, also there a lot of shops emerged on the internet that said, we can sell you this, we can sell you masks, we can sell you hygienic products, and all the things that were rare at the time, or in Germany perhaps toilet paper, was also a big issue at the beginning of the pandemic. And this was the challenge for consumers, especially those that were new on the field of e-commerce, to differentiate between trustworthy and untrustworthy shops, or to find on the social media, they followed a link where there was the product that they wanted to sell, but they had not really the confidence or the know-how to recognize that this was a fake shop, or that this was not a trustworthy shop, because in this field they usually used the local stores to buy things, and now in the internet. So the biggest challenge was to educate the consumers, or at least we hope so, where they could buy and where not. We had a lot of questions reaching us from consumers. I would say the sensible consumers who ask in advance, can I buy the mask on this website, or can I buy the products on this website? Does it look trustworthy? In this case, we could say no, and they were spared a financial loss. But it's, I guess in a lot of cases, it was too late. They paid and never received the mask. Yes. I think this was a big challenge, and also afterwards of course, to educate the consumers, or to inform them what are their rights and what they need to know to enforce their rights in this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And yes, indeed, what I have noticed just on my mobile device, because on my PCs, on my computers, I have got the ad blocking software installed, so I don't even know what the internet with adverts looks like when I use the computer. However, when I start using my mobile device, one can see the targeted ads, and what is sometimes a little bit disturbing is that you can actually see the ads on the product that you have literally just discussed, like yesterday, right? Okay, you just wonder where does that come from. And yes, like you said, the new users, the elderly, the people who are let's just say new to the interwebs, if you like. There's this old joke about the newcomer to New York being sold the Brooklyn Bridge, right? And it is kind of the obviously as a matter of a scam, and it is kind of a similar situation to people who are new to the internet. And what with my 10-year plus experience, I can see some scam trends re-emerging. I can see some new scam trends. Let's just say the situation scams, like you said, concerning purchases of personal protective equipment, etc. Right. Okay. So moving on to the third question. What could you say about any new consumer trends that have emerged? Do you think there's any greater environmental awareness, increased purchases, intentional or non-intentional from foreign companies, or would you say that the consumers are moving towards purchasing things locally? And again, allow me to give the floor to Yolanda first.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we see that more people buy things they usually buy in the physical shops. Now they buy online. Even if we see in Sweden, the trend is going that more and more consumers are going back to the physical shops. But this is a trend. We also see that you have more payment possibilities to see, and that consumers, exactly as you said, are trying when they see maybe the problems with transport and so on, they shop more locally on certain products. And then we can see definitely, and I don't know if it depends on the COVID pandemic or so, but sustainability is really going forward in a high increase. And also the business sides, they really try to adopt more and more digitally and combine the services that they have, that they will meet the consumer where he or she is. And that is really growing. We also made an investigation to see the trends here. And of course, we see that e-commerce will continue to grow, but it will also need new consumer groups. As we mentioned, the elderly, we see that the highest increase of e-commerce shopping for the food sector was the elderly, and that is still very, very high. We see also a consideration that trade companies will be fewer but larger, just to see, because it really hurt a lot of companies, and the growth is really a big issue here. So that is one of the issues. Also, we see the increase of platform use, and also we saw an increase from third country shoppings. But we see also that trade becomes more value driven. It's important for consumers that they expect that the company they shop from contributes in a good way to a better world. So that is kind of questions they ask more and more when shopping or investing or doing that kind of things. Then we see also two trends, that the low price and the luxury segment are increasing. More stores are expanding in this segment. So really that kind of issues that we see a growth on. But there will be some trends to stay and some are going back. But I think now that when the consumer has learned to shop on e-commerce, once you dare to put you out there in some way and you see it's not a problem if I just do a little research, or if I shop from the known trademarks and you feel safe, you will continue to shop more on through e-commerce. But also how important the personal connection is with the people who works in the store, if you know them, if this attachment, this is coming more and more, the service, the physical service that you get, because there's also people were missing when you're shopping online, not having this kind of context. And it's really important also in both the ways to know your customer and to give that extra service. And that's why maybe the numbers also go that consumers going back to shop in stores in some of the, depending on what kind of things they want to shop. So, but that are the trends that we see. Thank you.
Brilliant, Yolanda. Thank you very much. Would you say that it is more of a national thing in Sweden where the lockdown wasn't so severe, or would you say that, or do you possess any sort of data that would suggest that it's more of a global trend?
It's hard to say, because in the way we were very special that we didn't have a real lockdown, we had really also special requirements, as we say, to protect the consumers in the store. We had very close cooperation with the authorities here to provide the safe environment and so on. But I think, well, we know that some countries, the e-commerce is trending, the consumers are well known to shop, you know, and we see the trends that you don't shop now the usual ways, sitting by a computer, you shop using your phone. And also that kind of trends is coming. And also we asked the elderly when we saw the increase they had by buying food and getting the delivery home and so on. And we were amazed that have they learned so much, and the numbers was so good. And we said, this is a new group for us. But then we also find out that a lot of the elderly who really increased their e-commerce shopping was getting help from the grandchildren or the children, helping them to know the channels. And this is also spreading. And I think maybe this is a cultural thing, depending on how the internet is used in different countries where you have the lower grade, and also the accessibility to the internet, who differs between the countries. But I think this is the easy way of shopping, maybe using their mobile phone, is here to stay. And also the live shopping and the new trends that we know we are behind what they used in Asia and so on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Yolanda. And now we would like to hear Agustin's take on the same question. Agustin, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Regarding the new trends, if I can focus on specifically on environmental considerations, and something that we also have identified through surveys that our members have been carrying out at national level, is that consumers, as we know, are indeed very much concerned about the climate crisis. They would like to be able to do something, but the problem is that they don't necessarily trust, for example, claims by companies about the environmental performance of their products. And this was kind of also confirmed by the swift exercise that the European Commission and the national authorities carried out early this year, and actually have identified the proliferation of labels and misleading environmental claims, which has led us, as we know, to a lack of trust by consumers on these products and services. At the same time, one can wonder why the behavior, or the specific behavior of consumers, do not always match with their concerns. And here, of course, we cannot underestimate the power of advertising in order to create needs and wants by consumers. Just taking an example, which is outside the remit of e-commerce, but if we see, for example, the uptake of SUVs, which are already identified as one of the largest contributors to the increase of carbon emissions in the last 10 years. And if we see the advertising by the car industry, actually makes it extremely appealing for consumers to go for this type of of vehicles, knowing that are extremely polluting. So at the same time, we also need to think about not only the boundaries of advertising, but what is the responsibility of companies in creating these expectations and needs by consumers. And last and not least, certainly, we have a serious issue to tackle regarding the durability of products. There's a huge increase in waste, as we know, and partly it is related to the design of products that are simply designed to be disposed very, very easily. Many of them, particularly products that are bought from third countries like China. It also leads to consider what should be then the appropriate policy response. Here we need to look, of course, at the upcoming proposals regarding the empowerment of consumers in the green transition, concerning information and claims around environmental performance of goods and services, product design. So the SPI, the Sustainable Product Initiative, also is going to be an important role regarding the design of products, but at the same time, we also need to look in the context of consumer law and guarantee rights. We have a regime in place, which, as we know, made the trader responsible for malperforming goods. Perhaps the question now is to start looking what is the role of the manufacturer in this regard. And here we have the right to repair initiative that will come up next year. So maybe in this context, we should start looking at the role of manufacturers regarding liability for defective products. Thank you.
Thank you, Agustin. Yes, it is indeed, like you said. Well, yes, the consumers do declare in the surveys that they are very interested in the environmental impact. Perhaps they don't necessarily have that much trust in the environmental claim after, let's just say, the most significant bit in the last few years, this diesel car scandal. And I also I was also wondering, and if you could perhaps elaborate a little bit on this, what do you think the purchases from foreign companies are on the rise or are not on the rise, or are they actually intentional? Do the consumers actually know that they are purchasing from foreign companies?
That's a very good question. So indeed, when there are certain platforms which is very clear that the parcels come from outside the EU, think of Alibaba, for example, but there are also online shops in which it's not clear whatsoever. So the consumer might think that he's buying a product from the Netherlands, and actually have happened. We have actually consumers that sometimes they write directly to us or to our members, but there was a very interesting case of a consumer that bought a product from a retailer in the Netherlands. The consumer was not satisfied, so wanted to exercise the rights of withdrawal. It was indicated, of course, that this consumer had to pay for the return, but the surprise was that the return had to be made to China. So basically, the delivery was for free. The consumer knew that will have to pay to return and exercise rights to withdraw, which is a possibility under the CRD, as we know. But this consumer didn't know that the product had to be returned to China. And of course, that was much more expensive than returning it to a retailer in a EU country. So certainly that happens. The consumers do not know, and the surprise come up when things go wrong, either because the product is not working and no one answers to the consumer's query, or because you simply want to exercise, your rights withdrawal, and then you find out that you have to pay significant cost to return the good. So certainly there is much more to be done regarding almost like consumer information, but very clear information about from whom you're actually buying. Even if you're buying from what seems to be an EU online shop, you need to be aware that sometimes you might be required to send the goods somewhere else.
Thank you, Agustin. Yes, that is definitely something that we have observed here at the Polish ECC. There is a number of companies. There is a number of companies that consumers are reporting to us, and they all sound very surprised when it turns out that the item has to be sent back to China or someplace else because the website was on the .pl domain. The website was in Polish, but there's this, let's just say, there's this problem which is as old as written agreements. People don't read them. Right. Okay. So there's perhaps that one little habit that we could perhaps try and drum into consumers as a whole to at least have a glance at terms and conditions or look out for basic information, whether it is there or not. Right. Okay. So now the same question to James. So what can you say about any new trends that you may have observed as a large retailer? Do you think there's any indication of greater environmental awareness, or are the purchases from foreign companies on the rise intentionally or not?
And I think we've all discussed already trend one, which is much recognized, which is increasing digital sophistication, both amongst consumers and necessary on behalf of retailers to be successful. So no need to go back over that. The second, on sustainability and consumer attitudes, I think the answer is yes. We would agree with that, and we always try to understand different perspectives from consumers, but keeping up with what customers demand is clearly indispensable if you're in a consumer-facing business, as we are. We are sufficiently convinced of this that we have a large-scale change program going on. We've developed something called the Climate Pledge, which we and other companies have committed to decarbonizing, not least our operations. And practically speaking, what does that mean? It means that we have ordered some 100,000 electric delivery vehicles in order to decarbonize transport, which of course is a major contributor to CO2 emissions. We purchased 2,000 of those vehicles, which are now on European roads from Daimler-Benz last year, and the rest of the 100,000, which is around the world, will come on stream in the coming years. So that's one practical example. Secondly, we are now the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy in the world. So all corporates outside of utility producers of energy, we're the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy in the world to green the various operations from our data centers to other things. And thirdly, and perhaps less obvious, unless you've been involved in modeling such as this, we've been interested in the question of whether different formats of commerce are per se more or less carbon intensive. And some work that we were involved with last year tried to look at this and came to the conclusion that if you look at average consumption, average consumers, average consumption patterns, on average, if you look at non-food retail in Europe, physical retail causes between 1.5 and 3 times more CO2 emissions than e-commerce. And then on average, coupled to that, e-commerce saves between 4 and 9 times the traffic it generates. So we also need to think about this in the round, not just decarbonizing our own operations, but the different formats of commerce and how they contribute and how consumption patterns, consumption behavior contribute to that. So we feel good about what we've been able to achieve, but there's a huge amount more to do. And I'm convinced of your question, which is that this is something that consumers care about. The second part of your question, I wanted to look at from a slightly different angle. One of the things that we try to do is to enable success for brands or merchants, whether they come from rural regions or cross-border in Europe. So I'm going to take a Polish example, given that you're hosting today, but one of the merchants and brands that sells on Amazon, as well as in its own storefront and via other marketplaces, is a Polish company called Rainbow Socks that, as you can tell from the name, sells socks. And the company is about 7 years old, so not that old. Been selling on Amazon, I know, since 2015. And by now they sell in 70 countries around the world, including the US, all of Europe, Australia, Middle East. That's just what they do through Amazon, and they'll be doing a slightly different pattern through other marketplaces and their own sales. And it's a company now with 80 employees, and with sales in excess of 10 million a year. So yes, e-commerce is becoming more cross-border, and this is a good example of how this can be beneficial. We're seeing a situation where also rural populations are increasingly well-served and need to be well-served, whether it's by being able to receive deliveries and therefore a broader selection of products. They're not on the Champs-Élysées. They don't have the same, if you live in rural France, rural Poland, you don't have the same selection you do online. It also applies to rural businesses. If you are not in central Warsaw, central Berlin, you may not have quite the same opportunity to address consumers as if you are in rural areas. But if you have a website and you have a courier service or postal service that can pick up packages from your facility, you are able to address consumers almost anywhere just as well as the best resourced brands are. So indeed, those consumption trends are changing.
Thank you very much, James. We will certainly be observing this, both the retail, both the business side of things, because obviously the business, that's how businesses make money, by observing trends and then responding to them, obviously. And yes, the market surveillance authorities and consumer organizations will also have to observe the emerging trends as they come along. And again, me being in the front line, I can tell that. Well, I can tell that the face of the markets is shifting, basically. Right. Okay. So with the same question, Patrick, what is your take on question number 3?
Yes. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's quite clear that environmental awareness is rising on the consumer side, and of course the industry tries to also come forward with products to sell their products as environmental, as sustainable. And I think the biggest challenge for the consumer and also for the legislator in the future will be not only to raise the awareness for environmental issues and decarbonization, but also to give at hand to the consumer measures to recognize real sustainable products and not just, let's just say, hot air, and that is selling the industry. So that in the end, we actually have a sustainable economy and not just a big, not just for the publication. But there are also trends that have been emerged that we can see here, at least in Germany. One of the trends is that before the pandemic, we were a little bit slow with electronic cash and so on. Basically, before the pandemic in Germany, cash was king, and we thought it would never change. We were really slow to accept credit cards or electronic cash or other more modern methods of payment, like Amazon, like Google Pay or something like this. And this has changed during the pandemic, because also a lot of shops that were refusing to accept credit cards before now accepted this to avoid contact with the customer and to keep a safe distance. It was quite an interesting trend, and I think there is no going back. It will be slowed afterwards, but I think the matter is moving forward finally, because before Germans were a little bit strange in this, or not as not as trusted in the technology. What we have also observed that has been mentioned already is an increase in what we call drop shipping with Chinese. Not Chinese sellers, that the seller is actually in Europe or in Germany, but the order is made to the manufacturer in China and then shipped directly to the consumer without the seller having his own warehouse. And if there is a if the consumer wants to exercise this right of withdrawal, we observe that the trader, it doesn't really fit into this type of sale. So at first he tries to deny the right of withdrawal, and then the second option says, okay, you can send it back to China, and then we will reimburse you afterwards, hoping that as long as the consumer does not send back the product, he will not have to reimburse the consumer, or tries different ways to offer, you can keep the product and we will refund you just the half. All these kind of methods are not really up to the law, but it stands for, on the consumer side, he should, or he is obligated to send the goods back first, and afterwards it can talk about a refund. And this is something where we are stuck on the side of consumer protection, because we would have to advise them first to send it back and then hope for a refund, which will probably not come. So this is a trend we have observed, and as you said, it's not illegal, and it's the consumer who should have read the terms and conditions. Well, nobody does that. In my private setting, I wouldn't do it as well. So I think everyone could be surprised on this. Another trend I would say is that in a lot of fields we have recognized that it is not needed to move physical to another place to come in contact with people. The best example would be this webinar here, or other webinars in the business world or in the private sector. I think we will see, even if the lockout and the bans and the restrictions are lifted, that a lot of companies will say it is not really necessary to fly every 2 weeks to New York or to Hong Kong to hold a meeting, but we can do it once a year, and the rest we will do virtually. I think this is also a trend that will continue, because a lot of people see it as just practical and you do not waste too much time, and also from the environmental awareness and the sustainability, I think this will be placed. What we also see on the consumer side, it's not really consumer because I'm talking about the e-government. What we have seen during the lockdown is that consumers are using more the possibilities that are still in the kids' shoes, so to say, of the possibilities to do their governmental their things with the authorities via the online portals of the government. At least here it is not working that well, but I think this will also this was also kickstarted now and will reach an acceleration if you want to use these public services. And last but not least, a trend that I don't know will be sustainable, but what we have seen during the lockdown, a lot of people were looking through their things, were cleaning up house, so to say, and they found a lot of things that they sold online. So the private sale market, I think, was also impacted by Corona. For once, on the seller side, they found a lot of things that they could sell, and also on the buyer side, because they couldn't buy the products they wanted from the local market or from the shops they were used to. So they searched for it online, and also the second-hand sale, I think, was impacted by this. And now we see a continuation, even if the shops are open, of this trend, because of the disruption of the supply chain. As I mentioned before, there are just some products that are not available in the shops, new and fresh, coming from China. So if you want to have these products, you look into the second-hand market to see if you can get the product there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Yes, indeed. We have also noticed a significant increase in the second-hand market, in particular clothing. I shall not mention the name of the popular company working in Poland. I mean, the company is not Polish, but they advertise very heavily, and they seem to be quite a success. We do receive a number of queries regarding them, about how the buyer protection, seller protection works, etc. Right. So yes, so I think we have gotten to the end of our debate. I can see there are no questions from the audience in chat. There is a virtual toast for myself. Thank you very much. Right, and yes, just to wrap this all up, yes, we we have had quite an interesting discussion today, I believe. It was very good to hear the balanced perspective between the business side and the consumer side of things. Right, and yes, the conclusions of this debate, I would say that well, yes, there is a significant increase in the of importance of e-commerce. It was interesting to hear that e-commerce turns out to be environmentally friendly after all, which does make sense because, well, because you just get one delivery van going to the neighborhood rather than 5 cars going to the shopping center, right? Depending on whoever prefers what. And we have seen the emergence of new business models like the drop shipping that Patrick has mentioned, which is kind of a new thing. At least it wasn't as prominent couple of years ago as it is prominent now. A good conclusion from this debate is also that honest traders, they want the consumers to be safe, and for dishonest traders to be eradicated as much as possible, because not only they do not constitute an honest competition, right, the honest competition, but also they decrease the trust in consumers in e-commerce in general as such. So it is in the common interest of the market surveillance authorities and business to be able to weed them out as quickly as one possibly can. And yes, another big thing that is emerging, I would say, is the delivery companies for the items that would normally be shopped online, like food. I can tell that even in Poland we have a couple of household names, if you like, that are present throughout Europe. But during my time here, I have seen 2 or 3 new companies trying to enter the market, trying to use a little bit of elbows to find their niche in the market to compete with the more known global players, right? Okay, and yes. Carlos, well, I mean, Andre from Czech Republic says that this 50% refunds from China, it usually turns out to be that the products are nowhere near what was being advertised. Yes, we do receive receive complaints about this many companies that are usually registered in the areas where the regulatory regime is not as strict as in other places, and they tend to operate in the drop shipping model, which, as Patrick said, is not illegal as such. However, it does create problems. And another conclusion is that not only the big businesses and or business in general and the regulators should cooperate, but it's important to reach out through all the available channels to make the e-commerce a bit of a safer experience for everybody. And I would like to ask our panelists if they have anything to add on a final note.
Yes, Yolanda here. I can just add, I think it's so important that we're talking about cooperation, also to have clear guidelines from the Commission about some, I can get, for example, environmental claims and so on. We had cooperation with the Swedish Consumer Agency, having them to inform about what is right or wrong. And I think we need more that kind of cooperation between the business side and consumer sides when we cooperate with the consumer organization. So I think that is an issue to share more experience and also to make some gray areas more clearer for the business sides also, not only for consumers.
Yes, that is indeed a very important remark. Us ourselves, we can tell working in the European Consumer Center Network, one thing that the pandemic has taught us is to share the information a little bit in a bit more rapid manner, especially when it came to the particular bylaws introduced by particular countries during the pandemic, because it did actually help us in providing advice to consumers. So we should definitely expand on that and use that experience. Is there anything else any of the panelists would like to say, to add as a closing remark?
I would give a big +1 to both the things you just said. I think the urgent sharing by anyone who has information about a fraud or a problematic product cross-border, not just thinking about Poland, if that's the country you're in. If it's happening in Poland, it may be happening in Germany. If it's happening in Germany, it may be happening in France. Doing that public sector to private sector and private sector to public sector is vital. The second thing, just to Joanna's point about sharing, I want to give a very quick example, which I think sums up a little bit some of this conversation about the need for digital sophistication and environmental trends. We began profiling a series of products about 12 months ago on our store, which has the label climate pledge friendly, which are products which are particularly sustainable. And actually it was based on data that we got from the Nordic Swan eco-label scheme. And so we used the standard that they've developed. The interesting part of it was that when we began the project, no one had that information in digital format. So you could not integrate any sustainability information into a website because it only existed in paper form. And happily, they were happy, together with the Commission and the Nordic Swan eco-label, to digitize that data, which meant that we could put it available to consumers. So that brings together, I think, those two trends of becoming digitally savvy, but also recognizing the important trend for sustainability driven by consumer preferences.
Well, yes, I think that's a bit of a brilliant irony that the information about the sustainability of a product was not available in, let's say, more sustainable format. But hey ho, it's all a bit of a learning curve, I suppose. We just learn as we go along because the situation is unprecedented. Would Agustin or Patrick would like to add anything?
I can add, just to complement what Yolanda and James have just said. I think we also need to focus on enforcement. It's something that we always mention, but this is certainly the Achilles heels of consumer law in Europe. Not all consumers across the EU have the chance to have a very active national authority. Enforcement remains still national. So I think we really need to step up on enforcement and use the powers that member states have in order to better protect consumers against this type of practices. And indeed, it's very important to have the right data. There have been a lot of studies, businesses have contributed also with a lot of data about how consumers engage with the products. You know, you guys from the ECC, they also have collected a lot of cross-border complaints, consumer organizations the same. So now we have the information, we know where are the problems. We need just to take the right decisions, both at the level of enforcement, but also policy making, thinking that we have important proposals on the table and new proposals coming up. So certainly we still need a lot to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agustin. And I suppose it just leaves me to thank you for taking part in this debate, and I would like to thank all the other visitors, all the other spectators for participating. Well, there were no questions from the audience, but well, I suppose this all goes to show that the subjects on the table were adequately addressed, because as far as I know, some of the participants of this meeting, they are very inquisitive and they do like to ask questions. But well, feel free to ask us questions whenever you feel like. We'll definitely be there to assist you. I can speak on my behalf, hopefully on behalf of the others as well. Thank you very much for your participation.